Hi, this is Rhiannon Sims, and this is the digital portion of my autoethnography. I want to start with a brief introduction using our learning profiles that we did at the beginning of this semester. I feel as though this encompasses how I teach because I teach how I like to learn. And for the most part, I like to learn through hands-on activities. I like projects that can be broken down into steps. When I don't understand, I like the ability to Google. And when I'm easily distracted, I like to be able to keep a notepad handy, jot down things, and come back to those thoughts later and for them to matter and for it not to ever feel like my random thoughts are useless. And so in my teaching, I tend to do the same thing. I like to show students that it's okay to step out and take risks and write down their random thoughts, because sometimes they're not so random. Sometimes they inspire learning, that they didn't know that they wanted to know or needed to know, and it spurt, goes on and on. It's kind of like a circular process. You learn one thing and then it moves on to the next and to the next. And so in my autoethnography, I take you through 3 time periods of my teaching career, starting with induction teaching, which was back in 2011 to about 2013, and I've included my student teaching on this. And back when I was a student teacher and then into my first couple years of teaching, I was very focused on the standards and writing these very elaborate lesson plans, defending every single thing I did with research and best practices and backed up with data. And I was just really consumed with numbers. And not that those numbers don't matter anymore, but I was so consumed that I took very, very little risk. I took very little outside of the textbooks I was given. And so that's why I put these textbooks on here, because it's very prescribed what I was able to teach in those first couple of years. And some of it was self-inflicted and some of it was, district inflicted. So, and then my technology use was kind of limited to a smart board, in which I didn't even have that after my student teaching. I had a projector and a screen. And we focused a lot on writing journals in those old school composition books. And I never, ever imagined myself being able to do these digital journals like I have now. But back then it was very much into just making sure, just keep it, keeping on, like just all the stuff that comes with new teaching. I feel like what's sad is that you lose a lot of your ability to take risks because you're just trying to make it day to day. And so I did put this Andy Hargraves quote on here that says, on teacher education, induction into current mandates must not turn into seduction away from best practice. So I feel like this quote kind of encompasses how I was my first years of teaching. Like I didn't want to use these, I didn't want these things that were coming down, as mandates, to take away from what I could do in the classroom. But really best practice, what research shows, is risk taking. And I feel like I really succumbed to that a lot in my induction years, which I regret. But as I did move into novice teaching between 2014 2019, I feel like it just opened up. I just became more confident, and it just opened up this whole new me, because I started doing research and being less about. That's why I've kind of covered them up a little bit. Being less about worried about writing these perfect lesson plans and making sure that everything was perfectly aligned to standards. Not that my things were not aligned to standards. My activities and literature class almost naturally go toward standards, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing things just to be fun and engaging, but doing things that meant something. So it was kind of a balance that I found. I stopped shying away from like social media as text and started letting the students get up at the board and taking a chance on students being the teachers. I started incorporating a lot of project-based learning, so I could give them that applicability to their real world. I was allowing students to use phones, laptops, iPads. So all these things started coming about, and it really just came out of this idea that I could do these things and I could be confident, and that it was all a lot of self reflection. And so I think reflection is just a major part of teaching, which I started to do a lot more of as a novice teacher, because it wasn't about survival anymore. So in my quote for this one I got from Carol Ann Tomlinson. She said this, in Education Week teacher. She said, "I'd hope the message would be the same for each novice teacher. Study your students and your content deeply. Find ways to successfully connect each student with what matters most in what you teach. It's okay to start small. It's not okay not to start. I can help you grow." So what's truly like has impacted me as a teacher is taking that time to study my students, to know my students, to have those relationships so that I can help them to make the connections and then connect them to the digital modalities that are out there in a way that does align with standards and does align with best practices. But that comes from studying your content and studying how these things go. And because there is so little just created material for these things, because multimodalities, all these things are new, everything's constantly evolving, constantly making, so it does take work, it takes time outside of school, and but it's all worth it. And if we share this, I feel like as I'm approaching seasoning teacher, and I'm gonna go to that slide next, I've become more collaborative and gathered with other like-minded educators to all the more take these standards and my lesson plans and incorporate all these like digital medias and literacies that we have now to help students become digitally competent, because that's really where everything's going to go. As we've seen this past year for teaching, we've had to become digitally competent in a way we did not think we were going to have to. This teacher up here in the right hand corner, I put her because she has this big screen and she's got her laptop and she's got just a lot going on with the beats, and I felt like a lot of us were like that when we were introduced to Google Classroom, Google for Education in the classroom. And so now our students are one-to-one and they're bringing their devices every day, and they also have iPads and watches and phones, and then there's all these new apps. And there's this idea about transmedia storytelling, and that I've just become really, really interested in from this class. Really, it's the research that we've gathered, which I talk about in Vignette 3, and I just feel just so much more confident, and I take risk. And even when I know I'm going to be, given a walkthrough, I don't shy away from taking what I know to be true best practices and just going ahead and going with them, even if they might fail for that day, because everything is a learning experience. So my next slides kind of go through this the evolution of my teaching. So I initially used to teach at the end of Antigone. We would do like lessons on symbolism and motifs, and so I used to just give like just blanket notes, closed notes. I try to incorporate some strategies, but I read about New American Lecture during like my gifted endorsement, and so I went from just giving these like blanket notes to this lecture right here. And so New American Lecture incorporates what we already know. So I'm going to show you my notes that I put in here. It's talking about our New American Lecture helps students to engage with the notes as you go through the slides, and then they complete an activity at the end. And this is a way to kind of help students, especially even if they're synchronous, a way for them to like guide themselves through the notes without it being like boring or stagnant or totally teacher-centered, where I'm just talking the whole time. And this comes from an idea from the Strategic Teacher by Silverstrong and Perini. And so if you go to next slide, we'll go to the next slide. They go to an ed puzzle, and if you are live, the students, depending on where they're at, if they're home on their own, they watch it on their own. But if we're in class, I use Ed Puzzle Live, which is a great app. And so for those in class, we kind of go through it together and answer the questions as we watch the video. And then we record our score, and then I have the students individually reflect and then paraphrase. Then we goes on to some just actual notes, and we kind of discuss through the notes, see what they already know. Sometimes I might cover, some of this up and say, what do we already know? What do we, as far as definitions go, paraphrasing them in their own words. And then I talk to them about the connections between motifs and symbols. And then the next slide, though, has them apply these two terms. And so they tell me already what are some symbols they've already seen, or some motifs, what connections they can make, and then what themes they've identified that can be supported by these symbols and motifs. And so in the past, have really not done a whole lot with this. Like I said, I used to give blanket notes and then kind of move on and then just have them do the symbols motifs by the end. But for this assignment, I kind of changed it. And so depending on the students and the time that I have, on this slide, I have them either create a chart that we maybe do as a class, like a class chart, or I have them do individual illustrations in their journals, just trying to jotting down some ideas that they already have about things that we've seen. And then we go on to this slide where we do some commonly recognized symbols, and then I talk to them about how mascots are symbols and what do they think that means? What does the symbol communicate to people? So when a school has a bulldog or a shark, what does that say about the school? And then we talk a little bit about schools that have like less than threatening mascots like Georgia Tech and some other examples. And then we go on to reading scene 5 in the Exodus of Antigone. We do this as read aloud, and students have assigned or volunteer for roles. And then after that, I assign them this choice board. And so the evolution of this choice board, back when I was a baby novice teacher, I used to have students, there was a choice board, but it was very, very simplistic and did not have the digital spaces, and it didn't have a free space because I was very not as risk taking, and I wasn't as confident in my ability to assess whether or not a student's idea was good enough. And so I wanted to make sure that I had, these perfect ideas. So this has evolved into something where they can create, excuse me, a Google slideshow. They can do a Flipgrid video. They can create a poster or a game board. They can write a song or a poem. They can go to this link here, and it's all hyperlinked to create a mind map. And or they can do, like I said, their free space. And so this whole New American Lecture kind of evolved. Just all my lessons, like I almost use this strategy just about every time for notes, because notes in literature class are just so, if they're not interactive, you lose a lot of students. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of my paper.